Dear learners, welcome to this session. Today we are going to discuss about categorization of information sources by different thinkers. Myself, Dr. Archana Shukla from Faculty of Library and Information Science, School of Social Sciences, IGNOU. In our previous lectures, we have discussed about categorization of information sources in general. Now, today we are going to discuss how different thinkers and authors have categorized the information sources. No need to have any confusion, because according to their ideology, according to their thinking, these authors have divided the information sources into different categories. Sources are same. For example, take a book. Book is same, but somebody has placed it in the primary source, somebody in the secondary source, and in some cases in the tertiary source also. So, it depends upon the ideology of the author or the thinker. So, now we are going to see all these categorization provided by different thinkers one by one. Let us begin with categorization of sources as given by Grogan. Grogan has attempted to categorize documents relating to scientific literature only. Hence, periodicals here means scientific periodicals, research report means scientific research reports, and he has covered both published and unpublished sources. The coverage of these sources is fairly comprehensive. In the sources of primary category, Grogan has placed periodicals solely devoted to report original work, means periodicals those are containing original work. Then research reports, conference proceedings, reports of scientific expeditions, official publications, patents, standards, trade literature, thesis and dissertations, laboratory notebooks, diaries, memoranda, internal research reports, minutes of the meeting, company files, correspondence and personal files. All these things Grogan has kept in the category of primary sources. See, the first item in this category is periodicals, which implies scientific periodicals only. All scientific periodicals do not fall under this category. That is why the author has to specify the periodicals that fall under this category. We can call them as primary periodicals because they are having original or primary information in them. The second item in this category is research reports. No other author or thinker has taken into account reports of scientific expeditions in any category. In a way, there are also research reports. Their placement here is justified as they report the outcome of original research. Other sources mentioned here are unquestionably primary sources. Why primary sources? Because they all are reporting primary or new or original or research based information. Some primary sources are also missing from this list, like facet script, research monographs, preprints, reprints, information leaflets, notes, information cards, medical records, audio and video tapes, and computer programs. Similarly, electronic sources are also not included. Why? Because they are the one which is found commonly in the categories of electronic publications, means the medium is different, but the contents are same. Then the second categorization provided by Grogan is secondary sources. Here also he placed periodicals, and here he specified periodicals as non-primary periodicals, means where primary sources or primary contents are not provided, like abstracting services, indexing services, review of progress. In the secondary sources, he placed reference books also like encyclopedias, dictionaries, handbooks, tables, formulas, treatises, monographs and textbooks. So, this way Grogan categorized information sources into primary and secondary. In this secondary category also, periodicals are included here as abstracting, indexing and reviewing periodicals, because they are the secondary sources of information. Moreover, popular periodicals are also secondary periodicals, as often they provide the information from the primary periodicals. Information, surveys, manuals, bibliographies, yearbooks, directories, indexes, translations are missing from this list also, and some of them are categorized under tertiary sources. Similarly, in this categorization also, computerized sources are missing. Then the third categorization provided by Grogan is tertiary sources. In tertiary sources, he kept yearbooks, directories, bibliographies. Here he specified bibliography as list of books, location list of periodicals, list of indexing and abstracting services, guides to the literature, list of research in progress, guides to sources of information, guides to libraries and guides to organizations. Here you see majority of the items placed under tertiary sources do not really belong to this category. It has already been pointed out that yearbooks and directories are secondary sources of information. Bibliographies that list only primary sources belong to secondary sources. Bibliographies that list only secondary sources or both primary and secondary sources should go to tertiary sources. Union catalogues of books as well as of periodicals are tertiary sources of information. Bibliography of bibliography is a tertiary source which does not find a mention here in this list or categorization as provided by Grogan. A list of research in progress provides information on ongoing research, either just providing citations or citations along with a short description. Citations or the abstract are primary sources as they are being reported for the first time. A list of such items surely does not belong to tertiary source, as a bibliography of research article is considered a secondary source. Similarly, a list of citations or citation plus description should be considered as a secondary source. Guide to libraries and guide to organizations are also directories and should belong to secondary sources. So, this way this tertiary sources as given by Grogan is having some ambiguity, like we have discussed yearbooks, directories, they should be placed in the secondary sources, not in the category of tertiary sources. Then comes our next categorization. This categorization of sources is given by Boone and Smith. Initially, these sources were categorized by George S. Boone alone. Later on, with some research with Linda C. Smith, he added some more things to this categorization. This categorization is mainly for scientific and technical literature. Here, both the published sources, mainly the published sources are covered by and large. So, the first category comes here is primary sources, which includes periodicals, fast script, conference proceedings, research reports, research monographs, preprints, patents, standards, dissertations and manufacturers literature, which we generally know by the name of trade literature. Periodical, depending on the content, may be treated as primary or secondary sources. Hence, they cannot be always placed under primary sources. All other sources included in this category are primary sources except FAS script, which at times may contain some informative articles also. Manufacturer's literature is also termed as just I mentioned you, we know them by the name of trade literature also. In secondary sources of information, Bone and Smith included handbooks, encyclopedias, dictionaries, treatises, monographs, indexes, bibliographies, reviews, indexing serials, critical tables, abstracting serials, machine readable bibliographic databases, data banks and translations. Most of the secondary sources have been covered in this list. Sources like Express Information Service, list of research in progress, manuals, formulas, almanacs, yearbooks, directories, textbooks, etc. are missing as these three items are included in the tertiary sources. Translation as sources of information have been covered in this list only, which other authors have missed. Moreover, machine readable bibliographic databases and data banks have been included, which others did not. Maybe because they do not deem it necessary, considering the fact that in the machine readable form there is no change in the content. It is in the medium which is different. The documents may be in print format, in microform or in machine readable format. If the content remains the same, their categorization remains unchanged. Then comes the tertiary sources of information. Here they included guides to the literature, directories of persons, organizations, products, etc. and textbooks. So, by seeing this categorization, we analyze that most of the tertiary sources are missing, such as library catalogs, bibliography of bibliographies, directory of directories and guide to reference sources. It may be noted here that textbooks are placed in tertiary sources. The placement of directories here does not seem to be very sound, because as we know, directories comes under the secondary sources of information. Similar is with textbooks also. Then comes our next categorization. This next categorization is given by a Russian information scientist, Gilzarvik. He is little known outside Russia. According to this categorization, all information sources are either primary or secondary. There is no tertiary category. However, this categorization covers all literature, not only scientific and technical literature. So, in his primary sources list, he categorized monographs, collection of papers, FAS script volumes for example, conference proceedings, textbooks and manuals, official publications, inventions, specifications for example patents, then technical catalogs, information leaflets, scientific and technical reports, theses, serials, journals and magazines, newspapers, standards, information cards, preprints, manuscripts and galleys and data files. So, this categorization differs a great deal from other, as he has covered the entire gamut of literature, whereas others have covered only scientific and technical literature. As a result, some uncommon sources has appeared in this list. Then the categorization of secondary sources. Here he included reference literature, reviews, abstract journals, express information bulletins, standard indexes, invention bulletins, secondary publications on patents, library catalogs and bibliographic files. All the sources listed are undisputably secondary sources except library catalogs that belong to tertiary sources, as they contain information both about primary and secondary sources. Possibly library catalogs are placed here as there is no category of tertiary sources, because he divided the categorization into two parts, primary sources and secondary sources. Some of the items are still missing, like treatises, translations, etc. Then the next categorization which we are going to discuss is given by Subramaniam. His first categorization is of primary sources. Here he included laboratory notebooks, diaries, notes, medical records, personal correspondence, videotapes and experiments, and surgical operations. Graphs, charts and tables, usually machine generated during experiments, transcripts and audio and videotapes of lectures and discussions, letters to the editor or short communication in primary journals, preliminary communications in letters journals. So, this is the categorization as provided by Subramaniam in primary sources. Here he also included preprints and reprints of conference papers, conference proceedings, technical reports, thesis and dissertations, journal articles, preprints, reprints, newsletters, house organs, internal research reports, memoranda, company files, patent specifications, computer programs, standards, specifications, codes of practice and trade literature. So, by seeing this categorization by Subramaniam, we may say that the coverage is wide and it includes quite a few micro documents such as medical records, videotapes and audio tapes. However, journals and a few other items seems to be missing. Instead of listing journals as such, he has listed the content of journals such as journal articles, preliminary communication in letters journal, letters to the editor in primary journals, as well as preprints, reprints, newsletters and house organs, which sufficiently take care of journals. Anthologies including facet scripts, research monographs, official publications, information leaflets, personal files, data files, etc. are absent from this list. As this categorization is based on scientific and technical literature only, newspapers, information cards, etc. are excluded from this list. Then he categorized the sources into secondary sources of information. Here he included bibliographies, indexes, abstracts, current awareness services, dictionaries, directories, tables, handbooks, catalogs, yearbooks, almanacs, reviews, monographs, textbooks and encyclopedias. This coverage is also extensive. It may be observed from here that instead of abstracting periodical, the author has listed abstracts, and abstracting periodical is nothing but a collection of abstracts arranged systematically. Express information service is of course missing, as it is more or less unknown outside Russia. In addition, list of research in progress, manuals, formularies, treatises, translations are also missing from this list of Subramaniam. Then comes the tertiary sources of information as categorized by Subramaniam. Here he included bibliography of bibliographies, directory of directories, guides to literature. Library catalogues have been listed under the secondary sources. Guide to reference sources have not been listed separately, possibly with the consideration that these guides form part of guides to literature. There is slight difference between the guides to literature and guides to reference sources. In guides to literature, one may find the listing of primary sources along with the secondary sources. On the other hand, guides to reference sources are unlikely to cover only the primary sources of information. Then comes the categorization as given by Dr. S.R. Ranganathan. Ranganathan has categorized the documents from two different angles. First, by the volume of thought contents, and second, by recording media. Documents according to first categorization are termed as macro documents and micro documents, and by second categorization as conventional and non-conventional documents. So, now we will see the categorization as given by Dr. S.R. Ranganathan. First, he categorized into macro and micro documents. Macro documents: when a work expressing macro thoughts is embodied in a document all by itself is called a macro document. A book may be considered as a macro document. Then comes the micro document. A work expressing micro thoughts, say a journal article, is usually not embodied into document all by itself. Several micro document comprises a macro document when they are printed together in the macro document. This is an extremely broad categorization based on the volume of thought content. It does not go into the numerous type of documents prevalent in the world. Either does it take into account the various forms the content of a document take while passing from primary to secondary to tertiary phases. Then comes the categorization into conventional and non-conventional document. A conventional document is one in which paper forms the basic material on which recording is done by phonetic symbols forming the script of an articulate, natural or artificial language, or non-conventional script such as braille or non-phonetic symbols such as drawings or simply by writing them. These documents are used for the communication of thoughts, contents. Some examples of conventional documents are journals, serials, books, articles, braille books, stenographs, books with musical notations, or maps, atlases and similar documents, and handwritten manuscripts which we are seeing from a long time and which we are using from a long time. These documents are very much familiar to us, that is why they are known as conventional documents. Then comes the non-conventional documents. A non-conventional document is one which is reproduced from a conventional document either on paper, example a photocopy, or on any other paper, non-paper material, example a microfilm. Sometimes these documents are highly reduced in size, example a microfiche, requiring a device also for reading the information given in them. And the second is which records sound on non-paper media, example gramophone record or sound and picture together on non-paper medium, for example audio-visual material, then video recordings etc., or simply picture on non-paper media, visual documents. So, categorization of documents here is predominantly based on the media of recording, paper and non-paper. It does not take into account the content of the document. Going through these categorization as given by Grogan, Boone and Smith, Ranganathan, it becomes very clear that sources are the same, but their placement is different by the different thinkers, because according to their thinking, according to their ideology, or according to their analysis of various documents, they have categorized them into different categories, some into only primary and secondary, some into primary, secondary and tertiary, some into macro and micro documents, and some into conventional and non-conventional documents. The ambiguity is there, but this ambiguity is because of the different analysis as done by the different thinkers. So, do not get confused, just you have to analyze what are the contents given in that particular source and why a thinker has placed these source in this category, and why we are going to study about this categorization, because when you are having the sound knowledge of this categorization, you will be able to judge the soundness of a collection of a library. This categorization help us to organize your library collection, to provide different type of services to the users, and to categorize documents accordingly in the library, and to provide different services to the users. So, this way this categorization is very helpful to you. You have to learn all this categorization in detail. Thank you. Happy learning.